All right, so we're looking at some tense airspace today. Russia and Japan front and center. We've got this Al Jazeera article, right, talking about Russian planes basically buzzing Japanese territory, and this is not just a couple of pilots who are, feeling a little trigger happy. This is
No, you're right to be kind of intrigued by this. It really points to like a whole bunch of existing tensions. Russia and Japan, they've got
yeah,
this history, and then you throw in things like the war in Ukraine, and even, believe it or not, China's playing a role here. It's complicated.
yeah, definitely not a simple story. So, okay, the article lays it out, the incident itself. It's September 23rd, 2024, when a Russian Al-38 patrol plane, this is what they're saying, enters Japanese airspace. And not just once, but multiple times. This all went down near Riben Island, which is part of Hokkaido, Japan. And Japan, they didn't just sit there. They scrambled F-15s, F-35 jets, the whole shebang. Radio warnings, even firing flares.
And you know what's really unusual about this? This is the first time something like this has happened, at least the first time it's been publicly announced, since June of 2019. We're talking a 4-year gap here.
Wow. Okay.
It's a long time.
So it makes you wonder if something's changed, right? Like what's going on with Russia's military posture that they're doing this now?
Yeah, why now? It's a good question. And to really get that, I feel like we need to rewind a little, get some historical context here. Because Japan and Russia, they don't exactly have, the cleanest history when
Yeah.
it comes to, well, agreeing on who owns what.
Oh, absolutely. You can't talk about this without talking about the Kuril Islands dispute.
It's this cluster of islands stuck right between Hokkaido, which we just mentioned, and Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula. And that dispute, it's been going on for decades. It just adds this whole other layer to everything.
So this airspace violation, it's not just about like some lines on a map, right? It's almost like all this unresolved history is being dredged up again.
Exactly. And even the article, they're quoting Japan's government spokesman, and he's basically saying, point blank, this is tied to what's going on in Ukraine,
Yeah.
even if, we don't know exactly what Russia's angle is yet.
But brings us to the elephant in the room, Ukraine.
The article mentions Japan's been, very vocal about supporting Ukraine, sending aid, putting sanctions on Russia. I can't imagine Putin's thrilled about that. Yeah, it's definitely a factor. But it's also, it's easy to just say, oh, this is Russia lashing out. But I think we have to look at the bigger strategic picture here. Is this about, like, testing the limits, seeing what they can get away with while everyone's focused on Ukraine? Or is it about sending a message, reminding everyone that Russia's still a global player? It could be something else entirely, too. It's hard to say for sure. It's a bit of a head-scratcher, right? Like trying to solve a puzzle, but the pieces keep changing shape. But there's one thing we can't ignore here, and that's the whole Russia-China thing that's been going on.
Yeah, you're right. The article does mention China. It's like we need to zoom out the map a little and look at the whole region.
Exactly. This isn't just two countries, having a spat. It's all happening in this region that's already got its own drama going on. China and Russia, they've been getting closer, especially on the military side of things. Like, remember those joint naval drills they did recently?
Right. Mention that in the article.
Yeah, and they were right there in the Sea of Japan, too.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, come on, that can't just be a coincidence, not with everything else going on there.
No, probably not, especially with all the, the existing tension over territory and all that.
Exactly. And then there's that incident back in August. Remember that? A Chinese military aircraft flew right into Japanese airspace.
Oh, right. I'd almost forgotten about that.
Yeah. In Tokyo, they weren't happy about it, called it a serious violation. So you've got Russia doing their flybys, you've got China and Russia doing these joint military exercises, and then you've got China making their own airspace incursions. It's starting to feel like a pattern, isn't it?
It really does. Like, are we seeing a bigger strategy here?
Well, it's definitely something to pay attention to,
Mm-hmm.
because if you connect all these dots, it's like this picture starts to emerge, right? A region is, I don't know, kind of struggling with who has power, who's calling the shots. And every little incident like this airspace violation, it's like it could tip the scales.
Okay, so it's like everyone's playing this high-stakes game of chess and one wrong move.
Yeah, but it's almost less like chess and more like, one of those pressure cookers.
Yeah.
You got all this tension, right? All the history, the economic competition, countries building up their militaries. Every time something like this happens, it's like turning up the heat.
And nobody wants to be around when that thing explodes. But, okay, here's the thing. Why should we even care? I mean, this is all happening way over on the other side of the world. What's the impact, really?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because, yeah, it might feel far away, but when things escalate in the Pacific, the whole world feels it. I mean, think about it, that whole region. It's an economic powerhouse. Global trade depends on it. And it's not even just about the economy, right? Any conflict, even a small one, it could pull in these major players, like a domino effect. And who knows where that could lead.
So those Russian jets buzzing Japanese airspace, it's not just a local news story, is it? It's a global concern.
Exactly. And there's this other thing, too. The article mentions that Japan, they're being pretty tight-lipped about what Russia's really up to here. They're not saying what they think the intent of all this is.
So that just adds another layer to this whole thing, right?
Absolutely.
So it's like, what's the game plan here? What are they trying to accomplish with these flybys? I mean, is it just me, or is Russia being intentionally vague?
Yeah, it's like they're sending a message, but it's written in some kind of code we haven't cracked yet.
Right.
Like, are they just trying to flex their muscles a bit, intimidate Japan? Or maybe it's more about testing the waters, seeing how Japan reacts, how strong their defenses are.
Yeah.
Or maybe, just maybe, it's a warning shot. Not even to Japan, but to, say, the U.S. and their allies. Like, hey, we're still here. Don't get any ideas about messing around in our backyard.
Oh, interesting. And speaking of backyards, you brought up China and Russia's little partnership earlier. Could this be, more of a team effort? Maybe not directly, but
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because think about it. Anything that keeps the U.S. and, the Western world on their toes in the Pacific, that's a win for China. These Russian flybys, even if they're not calling each other up to coordinate, it all plays into the same game plan.
Okay, so let's say, for argument's sake, that Russia is trying to send a message with all this. Who are they sending it to? Is it Japan, the U.S., maybe even NATO? Who's listening?
Probably all of the above, to be honest. It's like they're sending out one of those chain emails that everyone interprets in their own way based on what they're worried about.
Yeah.
Japan, they see this and they're worried about their own borders, their own defense. The U.S., they're probably thinking about their influence in the region, whether it's slipping.
Yeah.
And NATO. They're probably reminded that Russia's got global ambitions and the means to back them up.
So much for everyone getting along, huh? We went from what seemed like a simple airspace violation to talking about, global power struggles and coded messages and, frankly, just a whole lot of, I don't know what's going to happen.
And that's geopolitics for you.
Right.
It's never just about one little thing. You got to connect the dots, think about why people are doing what they're doing, what the consequences might be. It's complicated.
Definitely makes you want to dust off those Cold War history books. Except, the players are a little different this time around. And the stakes way higher.
Definitely. But hey, if there's one thing to take away from all of this, it's that what happens on one side of the world matters on the other side of the world, too. What's going on in the Pacific. That's not just their problem, it's all of our problem. We're not as disconnected as we like to think we are.
That's a really good point. Wow. This has been enlightening, to say the least. A good reminder that it's never just about what's on the surface. Thanks for walking us through all this. I think we all learned a lot today.
Happy to do it. Always a pleasure to talk about this stuff.
All right, everyone, that's it for this deep dive. Stay informed, stay curious, and we'll see you next time.